can't do this work with people every day, this human services work from a feminist analysis, without learning lessons. And I think the greatest lessons learned is what you learn from your clients, from the stories of your clients. You learn about the bravery, the resilience, the fears and anxieties in really real human ways. And even though they're in a professional role, you are still a woman talking to another woman. And that's so important, to see that you are no different from that woman. She has got maybe different experiences from you, but any of us could be a victim of domestic violence any time from it, from our relationships. So that's one really good lesson learned. I think another lesson learned that I mentioned earlier too was about how to get your message across. So you can be a radical feminist, and there is whole images in our society about calling feminists feminazis, also, all sorts of nasty kind of responses about feminism. Whereas for those of us who embrace that philosophy about, the personal is political, know that actually feminism is a huge advantage to the whole of our society. And so we have an analysis that says patriarchal is very damaging for men and very, very damaging for women. And so that's a lesson learned, is to have a clear analysis about why you're doing what you're doing, but also why it is happening. And so that larger personal is political view around that what patriarchy does to men, the competitiveness, the ensuring that men don't use their emotions, or they get cut off from their emotions, or they're very heavily sanctioned if they become emotional. And it's one of the nice things about observing where we are now, is that is changing. But that's the work of perhaps feminists and others who in human services that have tried to ensure that people can be real about who they are and how they're feeling. But we still do teach, and many of the men in the men's program talk about how they were called sissies, or grow a pair, or you need to take a dose of concrete, about the way their emotions and their feelings were shut down through their socialisation from their father, who was also socialised in the same way. And that's the analysis of patriarchy, about what patriarchy does to men. There's no doubt that men were used by patriarchy to do a whole lot of things too, that, like fight wars and be competitive and get into, drink unwisely, all of those sorts of things. And so they're the kinds of lessons that you can learn on that larger level. Then there's the lessons that you learn from the work that you do. And I think I mentioned earlier about finding ways that you get your message across so it doesn't alienate people. And so how can you help people to see their way through to not challenging what they've always believed, and finding ways to change that belief. So that's obviously the work of a men's behaviour change program, but it's also the work in the community, like a community development, community education, community awareness campaigns as well, where you need to be able to get messages across that make sense, that people can actually think about, but not reject because it's, untenable, or I'm not listening to that, or I was never brought up that way. So they're some of the lessons learned. But what I think for new workers coming in, it's really good, it would be really great if they can actually build on the lessons that were learned by all the workers through the period where we had the development of our understanding and our responses to domestic and family violence, to men, to children, and to the needs of women. And to be really aware of those frameworks and how important they were, and how important those principles are that I've been articulating. That build on those, bring them forward with you. Don't and just by all means develop your new knowledge as well. It's definitely true that we now know a lot more about the effects of domestic violence on children than we did in the early days, when there was that view that if we get the mother out of the violence, the children will go with her, and everyone will settle down. We now know that some children were very resilient. Most mothers made huge efforts for the children to not be exposed. However, it's now known that even when children were in bed, when all this was going on, they had awareness. Or if not awareness, then the very next day, the mother would be really hard for her to struggle to be mothering when she was perhaps in pain, or she was frightened, or he stopped her from sleeping all night, and she would be making her efforts to attend the children, but that would be compromised by the experience of domestic violence. So there's so much more that we know now, and that we will learn to be able to help children to break that intergenerational transmission of violence. In the early days, community development was a very important part of what we did, which was to bring the community along, to raise awareness and to educate. And then community development sort of fell into by the wayside in many ways. And I think it would be great if new workers coming in really were re-exposed to the principles of community development, people's right to choose, people's right to have shared information and so on, and to be able to use that as a tool. Another lesson learned, of course, is about duty of care and making sure that you use those principles of confidentiality and safety and so on, but also self-care. So very important for workers to take care of themselves. And there is that whole issue about you need to be a worker in this field, to work with other people, you need to be very aware of yourself and confident of yourself. Be aware of your own strengths and weaknesses. Be aware of trigger points, be aware of all those things. To be quite self-actualized, as was the words when I was at uni, so that you're not triggered by the work you do with the client. So you are able to be there for the client. The client is the important point. You're able to give all of your emotional intelligence, your resourcing knowledge, your beliefs and understanding of what that woman is going through, and it's there for her. You're not working for you. Oh, what that woman said, oh, I had that experience. Oh, okay, I didn't think of it. You can't go back into your own self when you're working with people in a genuine way. And so working on yourself to make sure that you are the right person to be there as a resource for the clients that you're working with, but working then on your self-care. What do you do to keep yourself intact? What do you do to keep yourself energized? I think a little bit of cynicism is a very good idea, but certainly it's a good idea to grow some cynicism about what's going on around you and about maybe some of the government policies and so on. But to keep yourself to be able to be open and to be genuine, to be warm, to be caring, and to be there without, in a professional way, without stepping into that woman's life in inappropriate ways. And so it's quite common when you go for an interview, for example, to an organisation, when they say to you, well, what do you do for self-care? Are you aware of that? And so people can talk about, oh yes, I read, I feel wonderful when I go to the beach, I make sure that I leave work at work. And so they're very important lessons for each of us to learn as a community worker, a welfare worker, a feminist activist, whatever we call ourselves in this human work that we do in human services, is to be really aware of yourself, take care of yourself, be sure of yourself, be sure of what you know, but never feel superior to your client because you aren't her. Or even when you're working with the men and you see the brutality in men's lives, you can demonstrate to those men that you're sorry that their life has been like that and that their life could be better. And if they learn what the program is teaching them, their life can be better. One of the lovely things about doing this work too, which is a great lesson learned, is that you get feedback. And that's difficult in this current age where there's a lot of abuse and casual comments and dismissing of people and so on, especially in social media, for example. However, in this very warm and real human work, to bring someone around who was anxious and had their barriers up and were perhaps rude and resistant, and by staying consistent with them, with your messages, not being bullied by them, not standing up to them either, but being absolutely consistent and resilient, you can bring them past that stage, and then they can start to learn and change. What rewarding work is that? So one of the best lessons learned, I think, is that this work, if you commit yourself to it wholeheartedly and passionately, it's incredibly rewarding, and you do get the feedback to tell you you've made a difference in someone's life.